What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Touchline Talk show on a monumental day in the history of soccer in the United States. So much to get to. Before I jump in, as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. It is, in fact, happening. Lionel Messi coming to Major League Soccer, coming to Inter Miami. There's only one place I want to start with this. And it is the point I made right after the World Cup if this move was to happen. 5 months ago, 6 months ago, he was arguably the best player at the World Cup. He had 16 goals and 16 assists in 32 League One games for PSG. He contributed a goal involvement every game in a better league this season. This guy still has plenty left in the tank. Now, of course, he's not the player he was even 3-4 years ago, let alone 10-15. But this is different than the Ronaldo situation. Because there was a real argument that Ronaldo couldn't be much of a net positive to high-profile European clubs anymore. Right? There was a reason United were willing to just let him go. The reason we got to the situation with Lionel Messi is because Barcelona doesn't have money. He would have never left Barcelona if Barcelona had money, and he would be back at Barcelona if Barcelona had money. But Barcelona doesn't have money. He was not going to wait to see if they could figure it out. And he also didn't want to carry the burden of being the reason why that club had to cut costs all over the place to try and pay him. And so he ends up at Inter Miami. This is not about Messi didn't have anything left to give in Europe. And one of the quotes that I saw coming out of, I believe it was his kind of video announcement or whatever, explaining his decision, was that he did not want to play for another European club other than Barcelona. It was Barcelona or nothing. That is a very different conversation than the one we were having with Ronaldo when he went to Saudi Arabia. This guy is going to be really, really good in MLS. Because he was really, really good in Ligue 1, and he was really, really good at the World Cup. We just saw what he still can do. The second part of this. On the flip side, there are going to be a lot of people now paying closer attention to MLS because Messi is here. And I am putting out this public service announcement now. This league is not what you think of MLS. This league is legitimately good. Here are some of the players on teams near the bottom of the table. Outside of Messi, who obviously has nothing to do with Inter Miami's struggles this season. European champions Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi. Evander, one of the highest profile guys. Portland Timbers got him. He had interest from all over the place. They're not doing so hot. Chicharito and Ricky Puig at the LA Galaxy. Jordan Shaqiri, Chicago Fire. You can keep going with guys like Alan Pulido at Sporting Kansas City. Basically, every team outside the Colorado Rapids has some kind of big name of all of those teams who are off to bad starts. And they are some of the most expensive, highest profile players in this league. The teams that are doing really well, that are really good, don't have the players the casual soccer fan is going to recognize, right? We're talking about Luciano Acosta, Brandon Vasquez at Cincinnati. We're talking about Gazdag, Carranza, Ura at the Union. Even a guy like Denny Bouanga, one of the best players in MLS, not somebody you would necessarily know as a casual soccer fan. And I feel like that applies to most of LAFC's team outside of Chiellini and maybe Carlos Vela. But they're obviously some of the best. I mean, they're a phenomenal team. They're some of the best players in the league. Hani Mukhtar, same thing, right? Lower profile guy. I still believe he's the best player in the league. But the stars are not on the really good teams. And so every time somebody comes over, it seems like we had this conversation of they're just going to wreck the league. Now, Messi's on a different level, so it's going to be interesting to see how that part of this plays out and just how much damage he can do. But then these guys get over here, and you get the comments like Gonzalo Higuain saying, I thought I could just basically come and hang out. This league's a lot better than I thought. And I also saw Lorenzo Insigne said something similar recently. This league is too good. It's time to give it the respect it deserves. Soccer people understand that. But casual fans who are going to start paying more attention now that Messi is here in this country, remember that part of it too. This does not make Inter Miami the favorites to win MLS Cup. And by the way, it's an Inter Miami team missing 2 key players. Which gets to the next part of this. How do they build this team around him? Messi is not going to play defense. He wasn't doing it at PSG. He's certainly not doing it here. That's fine. Who does that running for him, though? This was one of my big hurdles with PSG, is you had 3 guys up front who didn't want to do the defensive work. And now you've lost 2 midfielders who are 2 of the guys that are going to compensate for that. And now if you're talking about bringing in, hypothetically, Sergio Busquets and Luis Suarez, are those guys going to help out with the defensive part and the running? You have got to find a way to compensate for the physical limitations if you're going to bring in some of Messi's friends and the physical limitations Messi has. Or else this is not going to work the way they hope. To me, it is that simple. He can be really good. That does not translate to team success. Ask the guys in Toronto. This sport involves too much to just be about one player and one part of the game. Even though he's the best ever to do it and he's still really good. Which then gets to the next part. There is a manager out there in an incredible stroke of fortune who has worked with Messi, built an MLS Cup champion from scratch, and loves this league. That is Tata Martino. Oh, and by the way, obviously native Spanish speaker too. If it couldn't get any better for Inter Miami, you've got that going for you too. This is screaming for Tata Martino. And I don't know exactly what his relationship with Messi is like. I saw some reports that it was fine. They were cool, not super tight. That's okay. Because if I'm Inter Miami, I want somebody in there who knows this league. For the reason I was just talking about. Tata Martino figured out how to actually build a great team, not collect a bunch of great players. Because there is a huge difference. Again, ask Toronto. That experience is incredibly valuable when you have to get so much right around Messi because you're still limited by the salary cap. because you can't just go pick whoever you want for every position. You need to find value, and there is an incredible value, as LAFC learned, as Atlanta learned, as Austin learned, in getting guys who know this league and who have done this before and who are used to the flights and all of that stuff. Inter Miami hasn't gotten very many of those guys. Tata Martino knows that because he's seen this league. He saw how to build a successful team in Atlanta. This is a home run. If they, and I can't see Tata Martino turning this down if they offer it to him. Unless Messi says, I don't want him. In which case, you have to just appease Messi, even though, to me, I want the person with the ultimate leverage being somebody who knows this league. Messi can come in here and say he knows exactly what he wants. And you have to abide by it. That's part of the deal. But this is a different world. Tata Martino is the perfect combination where he can help integrate Messi. He already has that relationship, and he can bring the MLS knowledge that you need to actually be good in this league, not just a bunch of names. The final thing here. This is a significant blow to the Saudi Arabian efforts and what the PIF is trying to do. Because Messi basically said, I can't be bought with money. That is huge. Because there is the financial, marketing aspect of this. This is what MLS was banking on with that Apple deal. It wasn't MLS fans, because you're going to lose some of them because they're not going to pay you that money. What they were banking on is the global appeal. The fact that it is now much easier to get access to this around the world. And the idea that you get Messi, and all of a sudden, you're already looking at the ticket prices for games he's not even going to play in, are getting, quadrupled. And think about the thousands of people in Argentina who are going to buy MLS Season Pass now to watch him. All of that is coming to the U.S. rather than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia can go buy any other player. They do not have the marketing appeal of Messi at this point in his career coming off of a World Cup. They just don't. This is one of one, obviously. So it's a big blow. And I do want to talk about the Saudi Arabia part of this for a second because I just haven't gotten a chance to yet. And this ties in nicely with the ridiculous offer that they made Messi that he turned down. What is clear now with Messi is that money is not going to buy everybody. The question is, how many people can it buy and what kind of people can it buy? Because it is one thing to get Ronaldo when his time in Europe is basically up, to get Karim Benzema at 35 and coming off of a not spectacular season where he still clearly had more to offer Real Madrid if he wanted to stay. But he's also getting to that point where he's not going to be the focal point of Real Madrid's attack. They can go bring in somebody this summer who is better at this point than Benzema. Will they is a different question. But if it's Harry Kane, the answer is yes. What is going to be really interesting and is already starting to happen is whether you can get the guys who still have Champions League caliber seasons left and they aren't at that point where they're making one more move for the end of their career. And it appears N'Golo Kante is going to be the first one to go from that group. And there are some other examples of players already in the league, but of this group of, globally recognized players that Saudi Arabia is now going after. N'Golo Kante is 32. He could have stayed at Chelsea. He could have gone anywhere else in Europe. He chose to take the money, reportedly. I don't think anything is officially done, but it seems like it's going to happen any day. Then there's the next level, which is Wilfried Zaha. Wilfried Zaha is 30. I do not believe he has ever played in a European competition because Crystal Palace haven't qualified for one. He is a free agent. There are plenty of clubs across Europe he could go play in the Champions League next season if he wanted to. Again, never had that experience. Crystal Palace could pay him a bunch of money. Of course, nowhere near what Saudi Arabia would. But if you start losing those kind of guys, now it becomes a different conversation. It is one thing if Saudi Arabia becomes a, semi-retirement home at the very end of careers where you just take the money. And yes, the source of that money needs to be talked about. I'm not getting into that conversation now, and quite honestly, I just don't feel like there's that much of a conversation to have. Either that is something that you are morally okay with, and there's a price that you can be bought at, or it is something you don't want to participate in. It's pretty black and white. But it is one thing to say, I'm going to get my last payday. It is another to say that money is more important than the opportunity to continue my career in Europe and to compete for European honors. That is going to be the big test here. Does the Saudi Arabian League start winning those kind of battles? Because you're already hearing about this next, David De Gea, Son Heung-min. There was another name I saw today that's getting floated around. There's these other players they are already trying to interest, who are at the top level right now. That is where we're going to really figure out how much sway this league has. If you start pulling people from the Champions League, Ilkay Gundogan, that was the other one, as he's trying to figure out what he wants his next step to be. Barcelona want him, Manchester City would like to keep him for obvious reasons. He's got time left in Europe if he wants it. Again, I believe he's going to turn 33 in October. So he's the same age as Conte right now, if I have that right. Those guys have good years in Europe left. It's the same test with the Live Golf of, okay, you're going to get some guys in special situations, Phil Mickelson, etc. Where it started to get real was when your Bryson DeChambeau's, your Dustin Johnsons, right? Those kind of guys started going over as well. And then it was a different ballgame. And we're getting to the same point here. And so it seemed like the momentum was kind of swinging toward N'Golo Kante's almost officially signed, Benzema making a big offer to Zaha, and Messi came in and said, no, I want to go to MLS. It stalled some of that momentum at least. We're going to have to figure out just how much momentum it stalled. But this is a massive win for not just MLS, but everybody concerned about what is happening in Saudi Arabia and concerned about the money. Because Messi said, if I can't go to Barcelona, I'm going to Miami. So let's all just take a deep breath. Let's get excited. Remember how good he's been over the past 6 months. Specifically, the World Cup part of that. And also remember This league is good. Even if casual fans don't know who the players on those best teams are, there's a long list of big name designated players who have walked in and not had a lot of success. I'm not worried about that for Messi. I am confident Messi is going to be really good. But one really good player doesn't get you where you need to be to actually have a chance of winning this league and winning trophies. And Inter Miami's track record has not suggested this is a team that knows how to build a successful squad. Because it's been a lot of swings and misses and a lot of inconsistency. Tata Martino is the kind of guy that can change that if he ends up being manager. But there are a lot of steps between now and Inter Miami becoming more than just a glitzy name that has Messi in Miami, biggest, name in MLS in terms of a club with global identification, biggest brand in MLS, all that. That's going to happen. I keep talking about this, especially in MLS. Money does not guarantee you success. You have to be smart and actually build a really good, complete team that complements each other and covers up the weaknesses that come with Messi and accentuate his, all of the gifts he has. Joseph Martinez is a big winner here. He should have the time of his life playing with Messi. Does that actually happen? That's kind of the next part of this, is what does this actually look like? And how do we evaluate Inter Miami as a team once this all comes together, once they are healthy, and you actually see what this team is going to look like built around Messi. But today is not the day for that conversation. More than I've already talked about it. It is the day to celebrate this historic moment in Major League Soccer. Welcome Lionel Messi to MLS. Second big development of the week, Spurs have their manager, taking Ange Postecoglou from Celtic. The more I think about this, the more I read about this, the bigger a fan of this hire I became. What has become clear, and I got wrong, is that Spurs are not simply a manager away from being where they want to, where they're right up there, factors in some kind of factor in a Premier League title race, one of the favorites to win trophies, consistently qualifying for the Champions League, that kind of stuff. I really thought when Antonio Conte came in that was what Conte was going to be able to do. The fact that Antonio Conte couldn't do that, and the fact that it has deteriorated, makes it very clear you cannot plug, right? There might be 2 or 3 managers who you could argue you could plug in and immediately things change. And the 2 that immediately come to mind are not going anywhere. So of your viable options, there was nobody that was going to come in and immediately elevate this team. That is out of your control. The squad itself has to be better. What you can do is you can influence the vibes and culture around the club. Because that's been a big problem too. Spurs fans, not particularly happy, and for good reason. That is what Ange Postecoglou does. That is what he just did at Celtic. In the span of, a year and a half? And that is why I love this so much. You can't get to where there's a long list of things that have to happen for Spurs to get to be where they want to. But you can start rebuilding your relationship with your fan base. You can get somebody in there who players love, fans love, who unifies a club instead of Antonio Conte sitting there ripping his players to shreds and ripping the board to shreds. And Jose Mourinho saying the only club he doesn't feel an emotional attachment to he's ever managed is Spurs. Right? Those are your last two choices in terms of permanent hires. Postecoglou is the exact opposite. He has charisma. He gets you to believe. He motivates and inspires instead of denigrates. That in itself is incredibly valuable for Spurs right now. Because they need some good vibes. And then there's the mental part of this. That I felt like if anybody could change the culture and the mentality of the players, it was Conte. Again, I was wrong on that. But the other way to do it is what Postecoglou does. Where he just instills so much confidence in you that you begin to believe it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But it's at least a logical effort to take. A logical thought process to say, this might be what we need to kind of get out of this mental funk we've been in. Then there's the actual style of play stuff. Of course, everybody knows about Daniel Levy talking about Spurs DNA. And, I forgot about Nuno in between Jose Mourinho and he was only there for 10 games or whatever it was. So my apologies. So Nuno's in there too. And then proceeded, right after Mourinho, proceeded to hire Nuno and Antonio Conte. None of this has backed up anything about Spurs DNA. And Postecoglou is the kind of manager Levy was talking about when he said that. The part of this, though, that concerns me, and I talk about this consistently with managers, but it is especially true in this situation. Postecoglou's track record tells you exactly how this is going to go. It probably is not going to be great at the beginning. He is going to have to reprogram this entire thing, introducing a completely new system and a completely new approach of playing, and it is an inherently reckless, risk-taking style of play. And he will not change it. There is no plan B. So you're going to see mistakes. What happens as time goes on is that the players figure it out and he does a terrific job. It's exactly what happened at Celtic. There were so many questions at the beginning because things didn't start well and he doesn't have the track record in the European top 5 leagues. Which again, I could not care less about because there is no track record, no resume available to Spurs at this moment in time outside of maybe Pochettino, and that wasn't going to happen at this point, where you feel like that manager is going to clearly elevate these players. So be creative with it. Do something different than the stuff that hasn't been working. But if you are going to consider firing your manager halfway through next season because results aren't significantly better, you should not have hired Ange Postecoglou in the first place. He is not a quick fixer. He is a permanent solution finder, which is what Spurs need. But you have to give him the time. You have to take the bumps. It's the same thing I said with Lampard the first time at Chelsea. If you were going to expect him to do more than he did, why did you hire a guy without very much experience? You got to let him go through the growing pains and actually turn this into what he wants it to be. And then if it's not working, then you have that conversation. But everywhere he's been, history says if you give him the time, he's going to make this work. I'm a huge, huge fan of this. And maybe he's not the guy that's going to actually kind of undo all of this and be the one to finally sort of oversee the evolution of Spurs, if that evolution ever happens. But he at least is a guy whose personality lends itself to playing an important role in that process and starting that by getting everybody back on the same page, by giving people something to believe in, by giving his players confidence and being brave and playing in a way that is appealing and fun to watch. And that is incredibly valuable to Spurs right now. There wasn't a manager that was going to be, oh, if we bring in this guy, all of a sudden we're locked to make top 4. So take a risk. You just missed on 2 massive names. It didn't work. Go do the opposite. Get somebody who just came out of a situation where he had to deal with a lot of the stuff that you were dealing with right now and showed you he knew how to navigate it. I'm all in on this. What that means in terms of success and realistic expectations, I don't know. But I know nothing's going to change unless Spurs get the junk removed. And Ange Postecoglou is the guy to do that. Finally, before I take my first break, wanted to quickly recognize West Ham winning the Europa Conference League. Not a particularly great game, not a particularly great performance by West Ham. They get a penalty, convert it, immediately concede, and Jared Bowen, still underrated, excellent player, scores in the 90th minute to give them the 2-1 win over Fiorentina. First major European trophy in, I believe, 43 years. This is what they were playing for. It's what they were playing for last season too, except for Europa League, not Conference League, but this was their season. And things didn't go particularly well in the Premier League, but they did what they had to do, and they got themselves into this position, and then they got it done. 8 Premier League teams in Europe next season. West Ham's going to be one of them, obviously. It's a great moment for this club. Ironically, in the season where things didn't go very well. You know, they were flying the last 2. They come up short in Europe last season, and this is the time they get it done. But it's the benefits of the Conference League, where they're just better than every team they play from a talent perspective. And it is also another reminder, just like last season, that this competition matters. And it's great to see how much teams care. Mourinho set that tone, for whatever you think of him, and West Ham obviously backed it up here. Because this is an opportunity for clubs that don't typically win trophies to go win a trophy. And so West Ham treated it like it was the most important game of their season, because it was. And so now that you've had 2 of these in a row, the Conference League has really cemented itself in terms of its significance and its value. There were some questions at the beginning of just kind of, why are we adding this third one? Is anybody really going to care? And the answer is yes. And that's great. So congratulations, West Ham. Very cool moment there. Going to take my first break. When I come back, there's also a Champions League final to discuss. So that's what we're going to do. Preview of the final, the keys to the game, what I'm looking for, some interesting facts and numbers related to it. All of that good stuff will be coming up next. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. Champions League final preview time. Just going to kind of go through some interesting things I found researching this game to set the stage, the 3 things I am looking at in terms of where the game's going to be won or lost, and what needs to happen for both teams to win. So first, what is at stake here other than obviously the Champions League trophy? The first one, of course, is City joining Manchester United as the only English clubs to complete the treble if they win. The second is Pep Guardiola joining Carlo Ancelotti as the only managers to win the Champions League 3 times and to do it with multiple clubs. Which is a really interesting part of this to me. Is that right now Pep is in a group of distinguished managers. But from a Champions League standpoint, Carlo Ancelotti is just kind of above everybody else. And the fact that he did it with 2 different clubs. So that's an opportunity Pep has. He can elevate himself to 3, and he also then has the distinction of doing it not just with Barcelona, but with Manchester City as well. On the Inter side, Inter could become the 8th club overall and 2nd Italian, joining AC Milan, to win the Champions League multiple times. Additionally, they would end a 12-year run of clubs from England, Spain, and Germany, also known as Bayern, winning the Champions League, which is an interesting part of this to me. Obviously, Juventus has gotten to finals, but it's really been that variety of English clubs. Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Bayern, who have actually won. The last team, if I remember correctly, outside of that group is Inter, when they completed the treble under Jose Mourinho. So it could kind of come full circle as Inter being the team to break this little run up of the Premier League teams and La Liga and Bayern. Then we have our interesting facts. The first one, I really kind of couldn't believe it. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. There is not a player on either of these teams that has won the Champions League, which is fascinating. You have Champions League experience in terms of the final, obviously, with plenty of these City guys who were on the team that lost to Chelsea. But actually winning the trophy. Usually you find a guy who's, won it somewhere else, comes from Barcelona to Manchester City or whatever. Or, a guy who stuck around and they won it 6 years ago, something like that. But because nobody in Serie A has won, right? So most of a lot of these Inter guys have come from either longtime Inter players or have come from other Serie A teams where they've spent most of their career in Italy. They don't have a Champions League. And on the City side, a lot of these guys have just kind of stuck around at City, right? City don't do a lot of acquiring players from the Premier League clubs who win Champions League. Your Chelseas, your Uniteds, those kind of clubs. And so you have this group that just nobody's won a Champions League. And then a couple other things I wanted to point out here. Pep, 2-1 in Champions League finals. Obviously that loss coming with Manchester City against Chelsea. Simone Inzaghi is undefeated in cup finals. He is 4 for 4 in 2 seasons with Inter. So again, there have been, cup defeats in there. But getting to the final, first of all, his cup record is ridiculously good by itself. But getting to finals, he has not lost one. Which is part of my bigger kind of final point I'm going to get to here. But I want to save that for the end. And then finally, I went back and looked at, not that it tells you all that much, but just kind of out of curiosity, Manchester City's track record against Italian clubs under Pep Guardiola. They haven't played one in the knockout rounds of the Champions League. Played a couple in the group stage. I believe it was 3 wins and a draw. But you can't really tell much there anyway. I wanted to see, but because outside of Juventus, the Italian clubs until this season had not been making deep runs in the Champions League for the most part, Pep hasn't come up against them in the knockout stage. So this is going to be a different kind of challenge, and that Inter team that won the Champions League knocked Pep's Barcelona out in the semifinals. Again, I don't take too much from that. Completely different teams. That was a decade plus ago. So those are kind of your interesting factoids. On to the keys to the game, the things I'm looking at. First, it's the Inter wingbacks. It is the core of the system, the way Inzaghi plays, and it is also crucial in terms of trying to defend City. Because playing with that extra defender, if you can get your wingbacks to both be factors in attack and defense, gives you some more flexibility on how to deal with Haaland. It helps you better deal with the runners from City's midfield, aka Gundogan, because you can mark 5 instead of 4, and you don't get pulled apart as quickly. Now the danger is, and where you see the back 3 get exposed, is when that space that is supposed to be occupied by the wingbacks is open, and Jack Grealish all of a sudden pops up there, or Kevin De Bruyne pops up there, and so you're pulling a center back way out, and there are two defenders trying to cover the rest of the field instead of 3 if it was a back 4. That's what Inter have to avoid. So the positioning of those wingbacks is going to be huge. If you were playing with 5 defenders, in theory, it gives them the ability to keep City in check. The other part of this is so much of their attack goes through the wingbacks, and the wingbacks don't just push forward, they turn into wingers. How many times have you seen Federico DiMarco hit Denzel Dumfries with a cross? Right? It's the same idea as Liverpool, where you see so many Alexander-Arnold and Robinson connections. It's the exact same thing. When they go forward, they turn, specifically Dumfries, into a winger, where he's got license to not worry about defensive responsibilities. That has to be part of this. You have to create danger in those wide areas. And specifically, because of the way City set up an attack with that 3 and John Stones pushing into midfield, I still firmly believe there is space there. Nobody's been able to exploit it. I thought Real Madrid might, because you can play 3-on-3 with that front 3, but even that didn't work. So maybe it has to be a 4-on-3 kind of thing, or you get somebody coming from mid, you get Nicolo Barella coming from midfield plus one of the wingbacks, or both wingbacks, and then your front 2. I'm not budging from that belief that it's hard to actually make it happen because City are so good at keeping the ball. But I still believe that space is there. The wingbacks are going to be the ones who kind of open that up and create problems. Because if they aren't getting forward and they aren't hitting on the counter, Inter are going to have a really difficult time in this game. So that's the first thing I'm looking at is, are the Inter wingbacks factors? And if so, is it in a good way or a bad way for Inter? Number 2, I mentioned this briefly, I think, after the semifinals, but I want to revisit it here. Substitutions. Especially in a final, you go look at even this year's FA Cup final, that Champions League final against Chelsea. Most of the time, when City come up against really good opposition in a final, it is not what you kind of associate with City, where they're just blowing you out of the water. Because that's just naturally how finals work. Which makes it more likely than normal this is going to be a really tight game. In which case, there's every chance that it's a tie game or a one-goal game when the subs start coming onto the field. Inter are one of the very few teams in the world, and I'm trying to think of another one off the top of my head because I'm not even sure. I wouldn't necessarily put PSG in this category. Bayern is probably the team I would go to next, who have true difference makers that when you substitute, you're in the same zip code as Manchester City. Right? This is part of Arsenal's problem. And the depth is a little bit better now. But it's not just the first 11. It's the fact that there's no drop-off when Pep makes subs. That is what Inter offer, with the opportunity to bring in, I would assume it's going to be Goossens at wingback, and I would assume it's going to be Lukaku at striker. And whatever midfielder they end up not using. Inzaghi sets this up so that 60 minutes in, he's subbing wingbacks and he's subbing strikers. And it's a different dynamic you have to deal with, and the drop-off is not significant at all. That is a huge advantage that Inter have in this particular matchup that most teams don't. Is that if teams are making subs at the same time, you're not looking over there going, my goodness, look at how much better these City guys are than the guys Inter are bringing on. They have the depth to hang with City in that sense. And they need it to show. I have a feeling that this game is going to be decided by the substitutes. Somebody is going to step up and make an impact. And the question is, can it be Inter's players? And if Inter are chasing the game when these subs come on, can they be the ones to go kind of change the momentum and get Inter back in the game? Because there's going to be a lot of defending and a lot of just trying to keep City at bay. Or it could kind of be the other part of that, which is you get one opportunity. It's a 1-0 game. It's a 2-1 game. There's one cross that comes in. Can Lukaku bury it? Inter have the kind of quality to take the small opportunities they get and finish them. And the substitutes are going to be a big part of that. Because if City bring on the subs and all of a sudden Riyad Mahrez starts dancing around, you're in trouble. You have got to match the impact of City subs, and Inter are actually set up to do that. The question is, will it happen? And then the third thing, the midfield battle. And I specifically mean it in this sense. Kevin De Bruyne and Ilkay Gundogan have both, in the last month or so, more or less single-handedly won games in which Manchester City weren't spectacular. Or at least gotten something out of that game. I'm thinking De Bruyne in the first leg of the semifinals. I'm thinking Gundogan in the FA Cup. And Gundogan's got other examples too. But they have this knack. And I'm thinking, Kevin De Bruyne, I remember he had a free kick to beat Leicester in a game where there was just nothing happening and neither team had great scoring chances, right? And I remember a long time ago he had a big goal against Chelsea. He just has this knack, both of the players, for pulling out the magic when City need it most. And just being the best player on the field on a day where City weren't great. That cannot happen in this game. That is part one. If one of those two guys is the best player on the field, to me, this is over. The second part is Nicolo Barella, Hakan Çalhanoğlu. Can they be the creative force for Inter? Can they do for Inter what Kevin De Bruyne and Gundogan do for City? Because you're not probably going to get that many chances. Your strikers are not really chance creators for the most part. Can you be the ones to get the ball from back to front quickly and initiate a counter? Can you play that decisive pass to set up Lautaro Martinez or Edin Dzeko or Romelu Lukaku? Can you make the late run into the box and finish the opportunity if a cross from the wingback gets deflected or something like that? Can you hold on to the ball a little bit so that you're not defending for 90 minutes? Both of these things have to happen. They have to stop from getting over. They have to prevent themselves from getting overrun and letting De Bruyne and Gundogan dictate the game. And then they have to actually contribute offensively and be the creative spark for Inter as well. It's a lot of pressure. They're awfully good players too. They can do it. It's just a lot to ask. So that's the third thing I'm looking at is if this midfield battle is tilted one way or another, to me that's going to tell you how the game goes. And then the last part of this, what will it actually take to win? Now, I went with City first because it's less interesting. There are a bazillion different ways City can win this game, obviously. So what I went with was if they win most of the key matchups, maybe even some of the key matchups, right? Midfield, can they keep Inter's wingbacks in check? Can they get Haaland involved? Those are really the three I'm looking at. You know, Haaland versus the Inter center backs, the Inter wing backs, and midfield. If they are comparable in those areas, they're in a really good spot because that's most of what makes Inter dangerous outside of the two strikers. But if they are comparable in those areas, those strikers are going to be mitigated because Inter aren't going to have the ball and City aren't going to be turning the ball over to kickstart those counters. Because one of the things that you see sometimes when City don't play well is there are turnovers and being sloppy in possession. Inter are a team that can hurt you when you do that. But if City's best players play well, maybe that's even the most simplest way to put this. If City's best players show up and perform pretty well, they don't have to be spectacular, but if they do their jobs, they're going to win this game 8-9 times out of 10. Then you got the Inter side of this. And to me, there are two parts to this. One, the Stars deliver. And two, they minimize the amount of dangerous possession City has. City's going to have possession. That's fine. It doesn't matter. Because there are games, every once in a while, where City have all this possession and don't do much with it. That is what you have to try and achieve. That is why having 5 defenders is going to help. Because if they're just passing the ball around in front of you, it's fine. Now, maybe you still lose because De Bruyne comes up with a moment, or Gundogan comes up with a moment, or Haaland comes up with a moment. But that's your formula. And then you need that creativity, and you need your strikers to hold the ball up, to combine, to be able to take the opportunity when it comes. Because if those two, you don't need them to be, they're not going to be very involved in the game, probably. But if you can keep it under control, keep a clean sheet, keep it to 1 goal, and give yourself a chance, that's what the minimizing the City's dangerous possession is. Just keep yourself in the game. The second part is take the opportunities that you create, which means you got to create the opportunities and then you got to capitalize on them, which goes to the midfield, it goes to the strikers, it goes to the wingbacks. To me, those are the two things that need to happen for Inter, and Inter need both of them. Because if you keep City in check, but you don't take your chances, you're asking for trouble. And even if you score a goal or two, but you don't do your job defensively, you're asking for trouble there too. It's got to be both. Can't be one or the other. The final thing I'm going to say here. I'm not big into predictions, especially in a game like this where anybody picking against City is just trying too hard. There just is no way to say, here is why I think City is going to lose. That doesn't exist. What there is a here. Sorry. Here is why I think Inter have a real chance to win, and this is closer than it looks on paper, and that it's being framed from a narrative standpoint to be. And that's where I am. To me, this is an incredibly competitive game. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, I already talked about Inzaghi's record in cup finals. It's got to mean something. He knows how to navigate these kind of games. Two, it's the system. This system is something different that City don't see very often. And it is, in many ways, designed to take away some of the things that City do best. Inter are more than comfortable absorbing pressure. And they don't give up goals once they have gone back to this kind of counterattacking 3-5-2. They are excellent defensively. They can absorb pressure and take the sting out of your possession, which is, again, one of the keys I just talked about. The substitutes. The fact that there are 3, 4, 5, 6 Inter players, not all of whom will be in the starting lineup, who can deliver the moment that wins this game or that sends this game to extra time, whatever it might be. They have the individual talent to do this. There are some similarities to that Chelsea team that beat City. Nobody was picking them, but they were great defensively, and they had players who, if the opportunity presented itself, could be, the man of the moment, like Kai Havertz was, and they kept the clean sheet. There are plenty of reasons to sit there and say, Inter have a real chance to win, and I really believe that. But you can't get... the prediction, again, the prediction thing to me is just kind of silly in a game like this. The question is, what kind of chance do Inter have? And my answer is a much better one than most people are giving them credit for. They are playing so well. They are so deep. They are so good in cups in these one-off games. And they can pose some interesting problems to City from a tactical standpoint. That this is far from a foregone conclusion City are going to win this game. At the same time, of course City are the favorites. That's not the interesting conversation. The interesting conversation is, what are the things that make Inter a dangerous opponent? And there are plenty of them. So, we'll have to see what happens. That is the Champions League final preview. I'm going to take my final break and come back with the weekend look ahead. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one more time to the Touchline Talk Show. It is time for the weekend look ahead. Obviously, Champions League final. Just talked about that. Not going to go over it again here. Already spent plenty of time dissecting it. Of course, pretty much everything else in Europe is over. So, attention turning to Major League Soccer and the NWSL. MLS. 4 games I'm interested in this weekend. DC United at Atlanta on Saturday. Atlanta off to a really good start. I'm a huge fan of what Wayne Rooney is doing in DC. I'm really intrigued by this matchup. To me, these are just 2 playoff teams. How good can they really be? Very intrigued. Second, Austin at Sporting Kansas City. Austin. Starting to kind of put things together. Sporting Kansas City progressing from the awful start, but a lot of work to do. both these teams are not where they were supposed to be coming into this season. Got to keep building and make sure that you're not out of this by, the next month or so, or the Champions Cup break, or whatever marker you want to lay, right? It's summertime now. You got to get going. This is the time where if you're going to make a push up the table, you got to start that process. Then, those are both on Saturday. On Sunday, LA Galaxy at St. Louis. St. Louis, by the way, still right up there, top of the West. Now, big caveat to that. LAFC just haven't played many games because of CONCACAF Champions League. But Galaxy going into St. Louis, again, Galaxy, another one of these teams, got to get things going if they're going to turn this around. Parted ways with Chris Klein. It's kind of now or never. And St. Louis has sort of stabilized things again. Can they keep building on that and really cement themselves as not just a playoff team, but a team that's going to have home field advantage in the playoffs, or at least putting themselves in that conversation heading into the final weeks of the season? And then also on Sunday, FC Dallas at Portland. Dallas off to a good start. Portland coming off of that game against the Sounders, just kind of chugging along. These are typically the games Dallas doesn't win. Dallas does a good job of winning the games they're supposed to, and then just losing the games they're supposed to as well. And Portland, you're at home. Got to keep building on this. Got to get yourself on the right side of the playoff line. NWSL. San Diego Wave at Racing Louisville on Friday. Should say there are also, I don't believe there are any NWSL games tonight. Now with the air situation in the Northeast, there are a couple MLS, U.S. Open Cup, and also a couple MLS games as well, one of them getting resumed. So there are some games tonight as well, but focusing on the weekend, like I said, San Diego Wave at Louisville on Friday. Wave just doing their thing. Louisville starting to kind of get things going a little bit. Then Sunday, Gotham at Houston. This might be your best matchup, or one of your better matchups in terms of the table. There aren't exactly a lot of top of the table kind of meetings this weekend, but it's a Houston team that's been doing decent, and a Gotham team that's been really good so far. And then also Sunday, Portland at Orlando. Thorns just doing their thing. Orlando showing some interesting improvement so far. Again, at home, can you take advantage of that home field, get yourself closer to making the playoffs? So, those are what I'm looking for in MLS and NWSL. That is all for this week's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.